And there we have, viewers, the live visuals of the Prime Minister having reached the Heliopolis Memorial, in fact, the war cemetery in Cairo, where the names of at least 4,000 Indian soldiers who had fought in the World War I in Egypt and Palestine, in fact, have been commemorated. And those are the images of the Prime Minister paying his respects in that war memorial, looking at the names of our brave soldiers that had laid down their lives, the 4,000 brave Indian soldiers who had in fact fought in the World War I. And we had seen how this was a part of a very significant part of the Prime Minister's itinerary, and significant even more so as this is coming right a few minutes after when he was in the Al Hakim Mosque as well. And of course, we are looking at this part of the Prime Minister's visit in the war memorial. Let me also bring in Pathikrit Payne, security analyst, joining us on the broadcast. Pathikrit, if I could come to you over these images that we are tracking from the Heliopolis War Cemetery, where the Prime Minister is present right now, paying his respects to the brave soldiers, at least 4,000 of the brave soldiers that had died fighting in various campaigns in Egypt and Palestine in the First World War. Of course, a lot of significance, a lot of historical significance that we are also looking at as far as the partnership between India and Egypt is concerned. And in the backdrop of these discussions as well, when we look at these images, what do you make of this, Pathikrit? If you could break this down for our viewers as well, as we stay with these images from the war cemetery.
Good afternoon. Over the last 9 years, Prime Minister Modi, wherever he has gone, every time we talk about the cultural connect, the cultural root discovery that he has always given a lot of importance to. One of the key aspects of the cultural connect is invariably commemorating all those fallen soldiers of Indian origin who fought against imperialism during World War I and World War II. And that way, if you look at it, it is of great significance that Prime Minister Modi, wherever he has gone, be it here, be it in many other places, including in Israel or France, he has never spared a single occasion to commemorate, to pay homage on behalf of 140 crore Indians to those fallen soldiers. Secondly, when it comes to India and Egypt relationship, we have to understand that Egypt is one of the largest economies of Africa. It is a gateway to northern Africa, and it has consistently fought against all kind of extremism. We must remember there are many other countries in Africa, especially in North Africa, which are besieged with all kind of problems of terrorism, sectarian violence, Islamic radical extremism. Egypt, in spite of being a Muslim majority country, has consistently fought against all kind of extremism and has always given a lot of respect to what we call secularism and equal respect for all religions. So from that perspective, I think Egypt is a great emerging partner of India in India's fight against all kind of extremism and terrorism, especially cross-border terrorism. Also, we have to remember that in the areas of defense cooperation, Egypt is fast emerging as one of India's most trusted partners. There are talks going on between Egypt and India on Egypt's potential purchase of Indian-made light combat aircraft and many other such inventory, defense security inventory, which are made by Indian companies. We also must remember that Egypt is one of the strong partners, major non-NATO ally of United States. So in that way, there is a convergence that is happening between the shared interest of India, United States, and Egypt. Egypt has bilateral relations with Israel. Egypt has always. We must also remember that Egypt has been one of the founding members of the non-aligned movement long back. So on various dimensions, whether it is in the realm of economy, whether it is in the realm of fighting against extremism and terrorism, whether it is in the realm of military cooperation, I think especially in the last 9 years, a lot of effort has been made to converge and deepen the relationship. And finally, we must remember that just like India, Egypt is also a country with a strong civilizational past. It is not just a mere country which was born a few decades back. Like India, it has a history which dates back to 5 to 10,000 years and even before that. So in that perspective, in that context, I think there are a lot of areas of convergence. Prime Minister Modi is probably one of the rarest Prime Minister of India in the last 75 years who has taken the initiative to connect countries not just from the perspective of economy only, but to find convergence in cultural and civilizational roots as well. So I think it's a momentous occasion for India, and I think in the future we would see much more understanding between these two countries, their people, their cultural aspects, the respect for each other. I think it's a great moment for 140 crore Indians of India. Back to you.
That's right, Pathakrit, and something very interesting that you mentioned about fighting imperialism. And, because in the philosophy of it, the Prime Minister has been talking about fighting colonialist mindset as well. And he has been saying this for quite some time. Keeping that in mind, when we look at these images, you're very rightly pointing out the importance of these images from the war cemetery as well. If you could speak to us a little bit about that further, and also about the MOUs that had been signed between India and Egypt for defense cooperation, and in 22 itself, and we are seeing the ripple effects of that also happening as far as this visit of the Prime Minister is concerned. If you could speak about these things for a better understanding for our viewers as well.
If you look at it from the perspective of what the imperial powers have done to many of these colonized states, we must remember that in those imperialist powers tried to erase the memories, the roots of cultures and civilizations of respective countries. They tried to do it in India as well, but in the last 9 years, especially under the aegis of Prime Minister Modi, a lot of those cultural connects have been reinvented, rediscovered, and India has, in a new way, connecting with its own cultural traditions, past and civilizational pride. The same way, if you look at it in terms of Egypt, it was also colonized, it was brutalized during the Second World War. In spite of all that, we must remember that Egypt is not just another country. It has a huge civilizational heritage to take pride of. And in spite of being a Muslim majority country, in spite of being an Islamic country, Egyptians in general, they have not forgotten their pre-Islamic, cultural heritage, and they take pride in that. So in that way, there is a lot of convergence between India and Egypt. Both countries respect their own respective religions and each other's religions, and both countries take pride in their civilizational past. Also, from the perspective of, as you mentioned, in terms of defense cooperation, I think Egypt has shown considerable interest, especially in case of light combat aircraft Tejas that India is manufacturing in India. It is one of the lightest and one of the most efficient light combat aircraft. They have shown interest not just in the light combat aircraft. What I'm aware of is that there are certain kinds of missiles that India has developed, been developed by DRDO and other Indian companies. Egypt has shown interest not just to purchase them, but they want to deepen partnership with India in those cases by co-producing those combat systems in Egypt. So I think in that way, at a time when we see that Chinese hegemony is being trying to strangle Africa through death trap diplomacy, in case of economic and defense cooperation, I think India is gradually emerging as a preferred alternative for many of those countries in Africa. And Egypt may be in one way a major route for India to deepen its relationship, not just with Egypt, but with many other countries in Africa. And so in that way, as India emerges as a $4 trillion economy in the next 1 year or so, many of these countries of Africa, and I think Prime Minister Modi made a wonderful gesture by, seeking inclusion of African Union in G20. So in that way, many of these African countries, especially Egypt, look at Prime Minister Modi as a voice not just of the global South, but also of Africa, especially because for a long period of time, Africa has been totally ignored by those major powerhouses of Global North or United Nations, who never bothered about consequences of actions they take on countries like of Africa and especially those of Egypt. So as a country with a huge young population, which has aspiration, which has maintained its own cultural heritage, which is aspiring to play a critical role eventually in global arena, I think there are major areas of convergence between India and Egypt. And I think those cooperations and MOUs that are being signed will actually pave way for a new ground for cooperation in many other sectors, especially agriculture, managing climate, renewable energy, in areas of information technology. So I think sky is the limit in terms of potential. And I'm sure countries like United States, where Prime Minister was recently in, would also support India's deepening of cooperation with African countries, because many of these African countries have already burned their fingers so far as trying to improve their relation or deepen their relation with China. Unlike China, which does debt trap diplomacy, India does not have any kind of ulterior motive. India believes in the whole concept of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, one world, one family, one future. In that perspective, Prime Minister Modi's initiative in Africa, especially in Egypt, is praiseworthy, and I think it's going to help India in the long run in terms of taking the world towards a better world to live in. Back to you.
Oh, absolutely. And that seems to be the philosophy reflected in these images of the Prime Minister, as well as we are tracking these images, viewers, from Al Hakim Mosque, and then, of course, from the Heliopolis War Cemetery as well, where at least 4,000 Indian soldiers' names have been also written there, and the Prime Minister paying homage to those Indian soldiers as well. We slip into a very short break, viewers, but we'll be back with all of these images